Global investments in AI have totaled over $1 trillion since 2013, reaching nearly $300 billion per year by 2022. This surge is beginning to yield results that will disrupt nearly every industry, and programming is no exception. In recent months, AI programming models and tools have advanced at a remarkable and, depending on your perspective, exhilarating rate. AI technology has quickly evolved from assisting developers with autocomplete and basic code generation to generating substantial portions of code required for building complex applications. Today, most AI tools focus on Python and JavaScript, especially for generating applications in frameworks like React and Next.js. So, as Rubyists and Rails developers, where does that leave us? Ruby and Rails remain niche technologies, which means they haven't attracted as much attention from AI tool builders. Yet, the expressiveness of Ruby and the opinionated conventions of Rails make them ideally suited for AI-driven programming. And to me, that's exciting. Over the past few months, I've explored various strategies to leverage AI to make an already productive workflow even more efficient. In this video, I'll demonstrate how we can harness the productivity strengths of Rails alongside AI to accelerate application development like never before. Hello, my Rubyist friends. So how exactly are we able to leverage the best of Rails and incorporate AI to improve our productivity? In this video, I'm going to talk about two different strategies for utilizing AI to help improve our productivity. The first one, which I call iterative, I'm going to use AI to generate generator scripts for models, controllers, views, and tests. In other words, I'm going to use scaffolding. I'm also going to use AI to create and augment model views, controllers, concerns, helpers, and tests to support business requirements. And then I'm going to use AI to incorporate Flowbite components and Tailwind into my views. The second strategy is what I'm going to call the all-in strategy. And if you watched my prior video, this is the strategy I chose for that. In this case, I'm going to skip the Rails generators and use AI to generate everything. In this video, I'm going to work on a software that supports a small car dealership, including sales, parts, and a service center. I'm going to kick this project off by generating functional and non-functional requirements for our application, which I'm going to call AutoEdge. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in the video going over the results. If you are interested in those results, I'm actually going to commit them to the repo in GitHub. Also, if you're interested in just getting right down to the coding, you can use the chapters in the description, and that should take you there. So I'm going to read the first prompt since this gives us an overview of what we're building, and then the remaining prompts I will just kind of gloss over them real quickly. I am writing a software application to support a small automobile dealership. This dealership sells new and used automobiles, including passenger cars, trucks, and motorcycles. They offer parts and supplies for buyers to maintain their vehicles. Finally, they offer warranties and service on the vehicles they sell. I would like to create a product design specification outlining the roles and use cases for this system. I would like the requirements to be in the form of user stories and in markdown format. Can you help me with this? From this prompt, ChatGPT was able to generate a good set of functional requirements that I can work from. From there, I asked it to generate the non-functional requirements with this prompt. And then finally, I asked it to put together an MVP, and I gave it some guidance for that. And then finally, I asked ChatGPT to generate a project summary and executive overview of the MVP and functional and non-functional requirements. All of the results were in markdown format. First is our user stories, and these are the functional requirements. And you can see here ChatGPT did a nice job of creating these requirements, including the roles, an overview of the project, and the user stories broken down by each individual role in the system. And then it has some additional notes here related to security and mobile compatibility and also a notification system. The next phase was the non-functional requirements. And again, ChatGPT did a good job of coming up with non-functional requirements and the tasks required to complete them. Next, I asked for the MVP, and again, ChatGPT did a good job of identifying functional and non-functional requirements for our MVP based off the guidance I gave it. As you can see, it reduced our roles to only those required for the MVP, and then pared down the user stories for each of those roles required to accomplish the MVP, and then also outlined the functional requirements required for that, and then some exclusions. The next thing I'm going to do is set up our new project. And I'm not going to go through all of this on the video. If you're interested in how this process goes, you can watch the last video did, and I'll put a link in the description. But I'll give you a brief overview. I'm going to create a Rails project. I'm going to copy over some general cursor rules that I have, and I'll modify those as necessary for this new project. And again, cursor rules are there to guide the AI on how to generate code for this project. I'm going to copy over these requirements I just generated into a new directory called requirements. I'm going to set up Flowbite, which is the component library that I like to use. And I'm going to add Rails authentication and set up a gem that I need. It looks like we set up Flowbite correctly and the application correctly. We have our authentication screen, and it looks like we have all of the JavaScript and CSS files we need for Flowbite, as well as Stimulus and Turbo. Okay, after running a few prompts, we now have a nav bar added to the top of our page. This nav bar is a Flowbite component that, of course, makes use of Tailwind. We also have light and dark mode support, which again is a Flowbite component and also makes use of Tailwind. And I've also added a user to check our login and make sure that that works. And yep, once you're logged in, the login link goes away and it is replaced by this little avatar icon that has a menu item that we can log out. Once again, if you're interested in the prompts that I used in order to create this nav bar and add light dark support and the avatar, you can watch my last video. I'll add a link to that in the description below. Looking over the code that was generated in order to support light and dark mode, I can see that it added a script directly to our application HTML ERB file, our layout file. I'd actually like to move this over to a stimulus controller, so I'm going to go ahead and prompt Cursor to do that for me. It looks like Cursor has done this for us, so I'm going to go ahead and apply these changes. First one is to create a theme controller. And now we will need to upgrade our application template in order to support that, or layout. Let's see if it works. Okay. Looks good. Now that we have our application set up and Flowbite configured, and we even have a nice nav bar with authentication support and light and dark theme support, then I want to start implementing our non-functional and functional requirements from our MVP. Before I do that, I took a second and I asked Cursor in a new context. I asked it, do you understand the application we are building and the technologies we are using? And when I asked this, I didn't add any files to the context. Because we provided a cursor rules file, cursor rules is automatically added to the context in the chat. And so its response was basically built from the rules that I put in the cursor rules file, which is essentially saying, yes, we're building an automobile dealership application with the following key specifications. And it lists out our technology stack, including import maps, Flowbite, and everything else. It talks about the purpose of the application, talks about the development guidelines, including like the Rubocop style guidelines. JavaScript talks about ES6, HTML or ERB using Flowbite 2.5.2, and all code and MVP requirements are defined in our two markdown files. And then it asked me if we want to start working on some of this. But before I do that, I'm just going to kind of show you again roughly what our cursor rules file looks like. Again, I recommend that if you're interested in this, that you go take a look at this in the GitHub project. I think it's pretty interesting, and it definitely gives some background to the AI to help it do the right thing when it generates code. So now I'm going to open up our MVP file, and I'm going to take a look at it. And again, we went over this a little bit, but we can see that the roles are included in the MVP, and these are the user stories included, and these are our non-functional requirements. Before we can get very far in our functional requirements, we need to implement some of the non-functional requirements. Specifically, I am talking about our authentication and authorization. Since we already have authentication set up, we just need to deal with authorization. So that's where we're going to start. And essentially, this second item here, we're going to need to set up role-based authentication access for our roles that we identified in the MVP. So this is where we're going to start. And I'm going to go ahead and add some files into our context. So now I believe we have everything we need. And I'm going to say, I would like to set up authorization for the roles outlined in our MVP. Can you help me do that? That's a simple prompt, and let's see what it does. The first file is going to be a role to user, so this is going to be a migration. Second thing is going to be modifications to our user model, which is going to add this enum for our role, and that's going to add a few helper functions in here for us. And then it's going to add a concern for authorization. It looks like a modification. We're going to include these files into our application controller. And then it gives us some examples of how we might use this in like a vehicles controller and a service request controller. And then it says we can also create view helpers to help out with showing and hiding content, which I think we'll do. And then an example of how we can use that. So it has some examples in here, and it has the files that we want to generate. The first file I'm going to generate is our migration here. So Rails G migration, and it's called add roles to, oh no, just role to user. Okay, and that way we have our timestamp on it. And here's the file. And let's go ahead and apply this change to the file. Oops, it looks like it created a new file, but that's okay. I'll just take the content from this one, add it to this one, save it, and then I'm just going to go ahead and reject this change, which means it will just go away. And now we're going to go ahead and modify our user. And this looks good. Go ahead and modify our user, and then we're going to add our authorization concern. This looks good. And then we're going to include these files into our application controller. So far looking good. And I'm not going to implement our vehicles controller or our service request controller yet. We're going to do that later. But I would like to go ahead and implement this application helper, because that will come in handy when we're generating our views. So now I want to go ahead and run that migration. Since I did not add a role to the user I created, I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Oh, and it looks like we have an error here. So let's go ahead and copy this over to our chat and see if we can get this to fix, or see if we can get Claude to fix this. saying, I'm getting this error in my user model. Can you help? Okay, yep, and it found that our syntax for creating an enum is wrong. So let's go ahead and fix that. And so let's try this again. Oops. Okay, that's perfect. So now we're good. U equals user.first. Let's make it an inventory manager. And we'll save our user. We have our role. So now I'm going to take a look at our MVP, and I'm going to look at some of the user stories and decide what to implement first. Since we set our user up as an inventory manager, I'm looking at these user stories here, which essentially are, as an inventory manager, I want to view the inventory of parts and supplies. I want to add new parts and supplies to the system. I want to mark items as out of stock, and I want to generate inventory reports. This looks like a great place to start. I mentioned earlier in the video that I'm going to try two different strategies for implementing the requirements. The first strategy is to actually make use of the Rails generators and use AI to generate the generator scripts. That's what we're going to do now. I'm going to start with generating the models. And so I've pasted into a new context the prompt, I would like to generate Rails generate model scripts for creating the models necessary to implement the inventory manager user stories in our MVP. And to our context, I've added our MVP file and the authorization file. So this is what it's generated for me. It's generated a part model, a supply model, inventory transaction, and an inventory report. This looks pretty good, but I don't think we're going to need to track reports, historical data on reports being generated, so we could probably have that one removed. It looks like it's given us a description of the purpose of the models. Part makes sense, supply makes sense, inventory transaction. I imagine that's for adding or removing items from inventory, an inventory report, of course. And it goes on to talk a little bit about the best way to implement these and how they satisfy our MVP. But I'm going to go ahead and tell it that we will not need to track report history. Can you remove that model? Let's see what it does. Okay, that's better. And I'm just going to go for broke and see if I can run these. And it looks like it was successful. It's created our testing even, the models, and the migrations. Actually, I take that back. It looks like we had an error on the last model. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. I'm going to add it to chat. And I'm going to say, I received this error. Can you fix it? Okay, and it looks like it's made a change here. User references. Okay, this is better. Let's go with that. I'm just going to copy that one since we already generated the rest of them. I'm going to paste it here and let's see what it does. Okay, that's better. Looks like we're done. Show me how to set up the model relationships. I'm going to say, yes, please, and see what it says. Okay, it's made some changes here. Inventory transactions. Okay, so we can audit who's adding or taking things from inventory. That looks good. Let's go ahead and apply these. See exactly what changes are there. Okay, perfect. So we have our part fully implemented. Now let's modify our supply. Our supply is now implemented. And now our inventory transaction. You can see it's implementing some nice private methods here for us to calculate status, update stock level. Supply has some scopes, which is kind of cool, as does part. And then it goes through and kind of describes what it did. And then, of course, we need to add this relationship to our user model. And it looks like it did that okay. Would you like me to explain any part of this setup in any more detail? I think we get it. So I'm going to go ahead and run the migrations. And it looks like the migrations executed successfully. Now, because we use the Rails model generators, we ended up with some tests. Of course, these tests at this point are empty. So I think the next thing I need to do is go ahead and start getting some testing in place. So I'm going to start with a brand new chat context, and I'm going to add some files here. And I'm going to start with tests, models. I'm going to add the tests that were generated. I'm going to go with fixtures. And we have our YAML files. And I'm going to go with our app models. And I'm going to go with part. We're going to need user. We're going to need supply. We're going to need inventory transaction. And I believe that is everything. And I'm going to paste this prompt, which is I would like to add tests to the model test files based on our requirements. Can you help me with this? Okay, it looks like it generated a lot of code for us. So we're just going to go ahead and apply all this and see what we end up with. First one is our supply test. And next is our parts tests. And then we have our user tests. Kind of interesting. And then we have our inventory transaction tests. And then for each of these, I imagine we're going to need to update our fixtures. And so we have, parts YAML file. It's kind of interesting. It looks like it created a real parts, a brake pad and an oil filter. And supplies, engine oil and windshield washer fluid. And then transactions, a sale and a receive. And then that should be it. So with that, let's try testing it. Okay, it looks like it ran 28 tests, a total of 59 assertions, and we had 0 failures or errors. Now clearly, since all of these tests were generated, even though they looked pretty thorough, I'm going to want to review all of those and make sure that everything is covered to ensure that we have maximum coverage on the tests. Okay, now that we have our models and our model tests for the user stories for our inventory manager working, I'm going to go ahead and see if we can generate the scripts required to create the controllers. I'm going to start by adding some files and folders to our context. I'm going to add the folder models, app models. I'm going to add folder migrations. I'm going to add our file authorization concern. I'm going to add our session controller. I'm going to add our MVP file. And now I'm going to prompt it. I'm going to say, now that we have the models and model tests written for the inventory manager user stories in our MVP, I would like to have you create the Rails generate controller scripts to create the controllers that will implement the user stories. I would like to include the necessary authorization. Can you help? Let's see what it comes up with. It's reading all of our files. And it's interesting. It looks like it's created the scripts and then it's gone ahead and implemented or generated the controllers themselves. And so that's kind of cool. Let's see what the scripts look like. Do I just go for broke and implement them all? Maybe I'll quickly review them, generate controller parts. Okay, and then it has the appropriate controller actions in here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and run that. Let's see how it does. It looks like it's creating everything for us. We have our tests. We have some helpers. It's invoking Tailwind CSS, so it's creating our templates. They're using Tailwind. They're not necessarily using Flowbite, so we'll probably want to update those eventually here. But it looks like it kind of did the right thing. So let's go ahead and start looking at these controllers. I'm going to start by attempting to apply the parts controller. Let's see what that does. Go ahead and close our markdown file. It looks like it's implementing. I am perfectly fine with this. And then I'm going to go ahead and apply our supply controller changes. And it looks like it has our before action for authorization, which is kind of cool. And then our inventory transactions. And this looks good. And then let's see what it says to do next. Oh, we got one more here. Opening up our existing authorization concern, it looks like it's basically saying that it's going to use what is already there. I don't see any differences here between the two, but I'll try to apply it and see. And it doesn't look like there are any differences, so I'm just going to reject that. And now it tells us basically what it did. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open up our routes file and make sure it got that right. And it looks like it added all of these, but I would rather it use resources. So I'm going to ask it to refactor this. And I'm going to just do that by highlighting all of these individual GET requests that I put in here. And I'm going to do Control K, and I'm going to say, can you refactor this to use resources? Let's see what it does. And that looks good. That's a lot better. So now we're using resources. I'm going to try hitting some of these URLs in the browser and see what we get. I'm going to start with, let's go ahead and start with supplies. And this shouldn't be allowed because I'm not authenticated. So let's see what happens. Okay, sure enough, it redirected me to the login page. So let's go ahead and log in. Okay, now I'm logged in. Oh, and look, it went over to our supplies index. So let's try our parts. I'm sure we're going to get the same thing. Parts index and inventory underscore transactions. And we have our index file for the inventory transactions. And it looks like I said, our authorization seems to be working. And we'll test that as we start to implement these views. I'm going to just pick one to start with. I think I'll just go ahead and start with parts since it's the first controller here. And then I'm just going to look at index. It looks like it's just loading all the parts like we expected. And then it's also pulling back low stock parts and out of stock parts. So we can make use of those in the views. Let's look at our index page for this. Parts index page, and you can see it's just no implementation here. And I'm going to go ahead and prompt cursor to see if we can create this index page. I'm going to add it to the context. I'm going to say based on the requirements and well, let's do controller and model. Can you implement the index view for our parts? I would like, to use Flowbite for the table. Let's see what it does with that. Kept everything in context there, you can see. And it doesn't look like it's supporting light dark mode, so I can have it modify it to do that. But it did implement it as a table. And it looks like it's implementing separate tables for low stock parts, in stock parts, and out of stock parts. Okay, it's done generating our template. But I'm going to go ahead and ask it to add light dark support. Can you add Flowbite light/dark theme support to the template? And then I'm going to add to its context our application. Should have added this to begin with. It probably would have noticed this. Our layout file. It's going to take it a second here to regenerate all those. Okay, cursor is done generating our index file. You can see here we have our three separate tables, one for in-stock parts, one for out-of-stock parts, and one for low quantity parts. As you can see here, we have a refactoring opportunity. I could probably pull these out into a table partial, which I will do. But the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that these tables look good. I'm going to go ahead and apply all of these changes. I'm going to go back to our browser and go to the parts. And you see here we have no parts found in the inventory. Add your first part, add new part. Obviously, we can clean this up a little bit. Like this could be hidden if we're going to have the add your first part here. But we don't have our new page implemented yet, so let's do that next. Add that to the context. I'm going to say, can you implement our new ERB template for parts? I think that I'm just going to say that, see if that's enough to get it going here. And it looks like it actually picked up on our light dark theme support here. We have dark selectors. Okay, cursor's done generating our new template file, so let's go ahead and apply this. Then go back to our browser. Let's refresh our page. And we have a form. It's not exactly pretty. I am not convinced that it applied Tailwind classes to this. So I'm going to say, can you update this page to use Flowbite components? So we're going to have to check our validations and make sure that they match what it says we have here. And it looks like it's regenerating that. So let's look at name presence, Q, uniqueness. Yeah, it looks like we have everything here as far as our validations. And so let's go ahead and apply this and see what it looks like. Looks like it found the right file. Update that. Back to our browser and refresh. That looks more like what I would expect from Flowbite. So let's add a part real quick. Okay, we don't have our show implemented yet, so let's just go back to the index, and we do have our new part added. It's in both low stock because it's reorder point, we're below our reorder point, and it's also in stock, so that's kind of cool. Before I move on, I want to quickly make sure that it does support our light dark mode, and let's check this form as well, and it looks good. And now I'm going to want to implement our remaining templates, so our show template and our edit template. I'm going to add that to the context. I'm going to say, this is looking good. Thanks for supporting light/dark mode. I would like show template now. This should also use Flowbite. We'll wait for that to generate. In the meantime, I'm going to open up our edit page, and we'll get that generated next. Still working on that. Okay, once again, cursor's done implementing our show HTML file, ERB file, and it looks like it did the right thing here. It's kind of interesting. It's created the show section of the page, but then it's also implemented an inventory status card and recent transactions for this part, I'm assuming, which should be kind of interesting. Once again, I see maybe some refactor opportunities here, breaking these into partials, but for now we're going to roll with it the way it is. Now let's go over to the browser and see what this looks like. And great, so this is kind of cool. It did a pretty good job on this. We got our edit here, back to parts. Yeah, and we have no recent transactions for this part, inventory status, looking pretty good. One thing I'm noticing on these pages it's generating so far is I'm not sure I'm a big fan of this call to action link here not being a button. I would like to call it out a little bit more, but once again, that should be an easy refactor. I'm going to go back and I'm going to do the same thing for our edit page. I'm going to add edit. I'm going to see what it does with this. It may be that it's not creating a shared form with the new and the edit, but once again, that's an easy refactor. Looks great. Can you implement the edit template now? See, it just keeps reading all of these files into context, which is good. That makes it a lot more accurate when it generates these files. Okay, it looks like Cursor is done generating our edit file. Let's take a look. Sure enough, looks like we have a form here. Okay, and once again, it's just giving us a little bit of information about what it used in order to generate this, but we already checked these and they are accurate. So let's go ahead and apply this. And then once again, go back to the browser and let's edit the parts. And there we have it. So transmission. And it looks like the edit is functioning. So let's go back to parts. This is looking pretty good so far for parts. So coming back to our parts index page, you can see these two links are now functioning with our view and our edit. We have this kind of cool little status peel that it put here, some colors being used to alert us about stock quantities. And we also have this link here to adjust the stock or to add stock. And this is linking to our inventory transactions views, which we don't have implemented yet, obviously. But once we do, those should show up. If I click on this, you can see it's still got our little generated page. Same thing with adjustments. And so this is looking great. The next thing I want to do, since it's very similar to parts, is implement these same templates for supplies. But this time I'm going to see if I can get it to do all of them at once based on what it did for parts. Parts, templates, look great. And you do the same thing for the supply templates. I'd like the index, show, new, and I think that was it. Edit and edit templates. And I'm going to go ahead and add them all to our complex or our context. And let's see what it does. Okay, it looks like Claude Sonnet has finished our edit or our index template. Let's go ahead and apply that. And then it asks us, would you like me to continue with the show, new, and edit templates? I'm going to say yes. Okay, we now have our show template, and I'm going to go ahead and apply that. And then scroll down, and it looks like it's asking, do you want me to continue with the new and edit templates? I'm going to say yes again. All right, we now have our new template. Let's apply that one. Looks good. And scroll down again and it says, would you like me to continue with the edit template? And once again, I'm going to say yes. Okay, and we now have our edit template. Let's apply that. And then we'll scroll down. And once again, it's saying that we need to make sure we have these validations, which we have, and the database schema, which looks like it's accurate. And it kind of talks about differences from the new template and the edit template. And so it looks pretty good. We're going to see what we have in the browser. That was a lot of code generation there. So we have very similar looking index page, which again could use a little bit of cleanup, not a big deal. Let's add our first supply. I'm going to create a supply, and once we have very similar looking, which is good, it's consistent. Show page looks good, status is in stock. We edit the supply, that seems to work. Cancel. And we also have the add transaction here. Of course, we haven't implemented our transactions yet, which is fine. Reorder point, everything looks pretty good there. So we go back to supplies, and it looks like low stock supplies. Current stock, status in stock view. Kind of surprised to see this in the low stock supplies, but I'm not sure, what it considers low stock, because I believe we are pretty far above our minimum quantity, but that's okay. Once again, we can work on these things. Okay, it looks like we have a pretty decent implementation of our parts and supplies. Once again, I'm going to check this real quick, and it looks like it does support light and dark mode. No problem. Looks good. I'm going to go back to cursor. I'm going to close all editors. And I'm going to look at our routes file. And I'm going to also look at those controllers, parts controller. So it looks like we have some destroy action in here as well, which we don't need. Not a big deal. Or maybe we do need that. I'm going to think about that one a little bit. If we don't need it, then we can remove it later. I'm not going to implement that right now. I'm just going to kind of wait and see how this application plays out. Same thing, I'm sure, for our supply controller. Yeah, same thing. So the next thing I'm going to want to do is implement some testing for these two features. And so we have our controller tests here. I'm going to go ahead and ask Cursor to create some tests for our two controllers. I'm asking, can you create some controller tests for our supplies and parts controllers? I would like the tests to be based on our user stories implemented so far. Test controllers, and let's see what it comes up with. All right, we now have some controller tests for our supplies controller and our parts controller. So it looks pretty good. I'm pretty sure I'll want to review these and make sure it's covering everything. But so far, I mean, it looks like it's doing a pretty good job. So let's go ahead and implement these, and then we're going to try running these tests and see if they actually work. All right. That's the supplies controller, and now the parts controller. And let's see what happens. And we get some failures. So we get index. Okay, so I'm going to ask it to debug with AI and see what it comes up with. Okay, it's basically saying that we don't have a user in our fixture file, so let's go ahead and do that. Yep, and we don't. So we need an inventory manager user. Nope, we're still getting failures. Debugging AI. It is telling us basically that it's trying to use a sign in as method on the sign in helper. Yeah, module sign in helper inside our test helper Ruby file, which we clearly don't have. So I'm going to go ahead and add that because we are going to need to be able to authenticate as different roles to test. So let's try running that again. Looks like we're getting closer. We have 4 failures. Glancing over those, looks like it's trying to call tests on our destroy actions. So I can do one of 2 things. I think what I'm going to do is just comment out those tests for now until I decide how we want to deal with destroying parts. And so we have within our parts controller, looks like we have 2 destroy methods. Let's comment those out. And then our supply controller, looks like we may just have 1. Oh no, we have 2 here as well. Let's comment those out. And then try running this one more time. And we have success. We have 0 failures, 0 errors, 0 skips, a total of 46 runs, 105 assertions. I think at this point I'm going to end the video here and pick up where we left off in an upcoming video, in another video. Hopefully this video demonstrated how you can use AI to generate Rails generator scripts, which is nice because it kind of lays down the scaffolding, and then you can go ahead and refactor that scaffolding and add in things like Flowbite, styles, and then of course we generated all of our tests pretty much with AI and didn't really have a lot of issues to fix, a few issues to get working, but so far I think it's been great. I think I've been able to make a lot of progress on this application in a very short period of time. In upcoming videos, I hope to go through and clean up the code a little bit, like the UI, maybe look at some of the tests, make sure everything's being tested correctly, do some refactoring on components, and just various tasks like that. Thank you for watching the video. If you liked it, go ahead and click the like button. I would really appreciate that. And if you want to see some of my upcoming videos, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one.